Oh, am I on? Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Lani Haybrock here, your Government Affairs Director. So excited to kick off our Muslim Day at the Capitol with an exciting keynote. We have with us today Abrar Omeish. She is a champion of many important issues to assist with socio-emotional, educational, and economic needs of the students she represents. Abrar Omeish made history by becoming the youngest Muslim woman in Virginia to hold elected office. In December of 2019, she won one of 3 vacant seats in the Fairfax County School Board. She will continue serving in that position until 2023 when her term ends. She has worked consistently with the Muslim American community, advocating for women's rights for quite some time. During her time studying at Yale University, Abrar supported Muslim students and invited speakers to give talks about Islam. In 2013, she had an internship for Congressman James P. Morgan, where she worked to reduce women's restriction through legislation. She joined the Tony Blair Faith Foundation's Interfaith Youth Action Group, which fosters interfaith dialogue while facilitating projects that worked towards the Millennial Development Goals within the UN. Abrar also spoke at the 2010 9/11 Unity Walk in Washington, D.C. Besides being a politician, Abrar is the co-founder of Growth and Inspiration Through Volunteering and Education, also known as GIVE. This nonprofit organization offers young adults resources to excel in education and leadership. Before returning to Fairfax, Virginia, her hometown, to become a member of the county's school board, she worked as a legal fellow at a human rights and immigration law firm in Northern Virginia. Also, she collaborated as a spokeswoman for the No Muslim Ban Ever campaign. She was also elected as the president of the Fairfax County Government Student Human Rights Commission. She holds a double BA degree from Yale University, where she graduated with honors. And she also earned a dual master's of public policy and JD from Georgetown University. Abrar Omeish, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my absolute pleasure, and the degree is certainly in progress, juggling many things. But yeah, it's really a joy to be with all of you, and really what you just shared is a blast from the past. I mean, a lot of the experiences that I had done, high school and beyond, were the starting point of my advocacy and how I ended up where I am now. So for many of you who are planning to participate on, the Capitol Advocacy Day, that's kind of where I started myself. So it's great to join you guys.
Well, and that's perfect, because that's really what Muslim Day at the Capitol is about. It's about being engaged with your elected leaders and being able to fill your voice. And, a lot of people don't realize you have so many accomplishments. A lot of people don't realize really how young you are. I mean, as I said in your bio, you were the youngest woman to hold an elected office in Fairfax, Virginia. What prompted you to throw your hat in the ring? That takes a lot of courage. What was it that made you want to do that?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. I think the journey, started many years before I would have been known to anyone. It starts with kind of identifying something that for me was a problem in my community. That started with things like poverty, for example, where poverty was a barrier to access, and the fact that education is not equitably distributed despite being in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, right? And that's the starting point for how a kid enters society. Or even as a Muslim, growing up post 9/11 and knowing that there was different treatment for us, and having a sense that there was surveillance in the masjid or things like that othered our community. Made me keenly aware of some of the political challenges that were out there and made me want to do something about it. And so even for you guys right now, some of the issues that you might be passionate about could be the starting point for you entering all of this. And so being young kind of just happened to be the case. I mean, it really was more of that journey of deciding to do something about the problems I saw. We started with a small tutoring group that eventually grew into this organization that you referred to, that now, that led to me being nominated to different advocacy committees. And then eventually the natural transition from that was actually to run for office, because I gained more understanding of the community, of the challenges. And I came to see that really I'm tired of advocating. I want to be the person making the decisions at this point. I don't want to try to convince people that certain things matter. They just do, and I'm going to make it happen. So that's kind of what led to it naturally. I guess, and it happened to be that I was younger in doing that. It certainly comes with its challenges, to be honest. I mean, as I was running and continually until today, people say that, oh, she doesn't have experience, she's not old enough, but I think young people have a lot to offer in terms of where the future is headed. I've especially seen this on issues of equity and inclusion and social justice, where there might be a bit of a generational divide there. So not for all of us, but that's been something that has been has allowed me to be able to advocate in that direction. And I think everyone who's situated to do this, Muslim Hill Day, is well situated to share. So
I think that's the quote of the day. You said, I was tired of convincing people that things matter. They just do. I like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, especially through lived experience, right? Like seeing something, knowing the extent to which people are treated differently, like something like racism or ableism or you name it. Having seen that firsthand in some way makes me it's personal for me to fight for every person, because I know what it's like to be marginalized or on the sideline, right? But not everyone feels that same level of urgency, especially if they've lived with a lot of privilege that's blinded them from experiencing that. So
absolutely. Well, kind of want to start off talking about one of your key issues that I see you're constantly writing and talking about is you want to create a new standard of service. And you're certainly qualified to run for any elected office that you would want. So why did you start with the school board?
Yeah. To your point on new standard of public service, I wanted to say, you mentioned I was a politician. Yeah, I happen to wear that hat, but public servant. But no. So in terms of your question, I think the school board in particular, when we think about education and health specifically, those are kind of the first interaction a person has with local government and with government in general. It's one of the first ways they are impacted. You start from the pre-K in wealthier localities or kindergarten classroom in seeing how resources are distributed. And depending on where you live in a particular area, right, what zip code you happen to fall under impacts what resources are available to you, even in the same locality. So for me, in the same county, there's the richer side of the county and the less, well-to-do side of the county. Same taxpayer dollars, same, school system, but disparate provisions and resources and opportunities, right? So that's immediately a red flag, because we're a country that claims to believe in the American dream, that claims that we're a meritocracy, where if you just work hard, you can make it. Yet we don't provide resources at the very basic level in the kindergarten classroom in a way that is equitable. So how are we setting people up for success if we're not even doing that from day one, right? So that's kind of the injustice there, the socioeconomic asymmetry, the imbalance that existed made me passionate about doing something. And really it was through the experiences of seeing many of my peers. As I mentioned, the drive came from lived experience, having seen a friend of mine who just had to flunk out of algebra because her parents couldn't afford a tutor for her, and to see how wealth played a role in whether a person could be successful or not in this country, their trajectory in life, their ability to live up to their potential, and comparing that to how, especially as kids, it's not that I did anything in particular to deserve the parents I had, right? We all kind of it was the lottery of life, of the family you fall into and the resources that are available. So I think education is one of those key areas to begin addressing equity, and making sure that kids at least have a fair shot at life, and we continue to see, unfortunately, predictable outcomes based on wealth and race and things like that. But it is a place to start and have some hope. So,
yeah, absolutely. Well, and one of the things that we do during our Muslim Day at the Capitol, it's really unfortunate that we can't physically be at our state capitol this year, but one of our favorite things that we have is a youth kind of program where youth from the Muslim private schools in Oklahoma, they come and, we've prepped them and they go to talk to their legislators about issues that are important to them. And that's a really big part of what we do. But one thing that I got really excited about whenever I was looking over your website is that I've noticed that you really encourage student activism, and that there are several articles on your website that are published that students themselves have written where they've advocated for the removal of plastic straws, for racial sensitivity trainings, for town halls. And what do you attribute your success in developing this sense of empowerment and activism in the Fairfax youth? How did you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think really, one of the biggest aspects of it is being of their generation in terms of my thinking, the issues that I'm trying to advance. So oftentimes I find that even if my colleagues, fellow decision makers, are trying to kind of slow things down or stifle progress, for, if you will, the students are with it. The students understand the direction that the future is headed in. Be it climate change, it's a no-brainer for them. Talking about equity and inclusion, diversity, social justice issues. It's a given, right? So those are places where students have really shown up, or let's say mental health, even where there's not necessarily a consciousness broadly in society, but amongst this younger contingent, there's a clear understanding of it and a language around the importance of it, right? So these issues that really matter in advancing what's best for kids, which is ultimately the mission of the school system, that I'm supposed to be a champion of, are issues that resonate with the students. And so they care and it's personal to them. And I would add, I shared earlier that there might be a bit of a generational divide or some kind of gap. Realizing the importance of public opinion in shaping decisions that we're making is extremely important. And when it comes to the students, they're ahead of public opinion. If we think of it generationally, we have older folks making overwhelmingly across this country, making decisions for everyone. But we have, several generations that are being affected by that are already ahead in their thinking. And that's where public opinion kind of comes in, where students, will be wanting to put less patient, have higher senses of urgency for seeing the progress that we need and that we want and that they know is overdue. But that they don't yet have the right to vote, perhaps. And so they try to advocate and be involved in different ways. I think they really believed in what we were talking about. And at the end of the day, I think it comes to being in touch with what the people want and what the people are experiencing. So
thank you for that. Well, and so you are the first Libyan Muslim woman to be to hold an elected position in Virginia. Is that correct?
Yeah.
In the entire state. That's incredible. And so how important do you think that is to be a minority and to hold public office?
Yeah. It's extremely important. I think, first of all, representation matters, and even research shows this, right? You can't be what you can't see. If a young person can't even imagine someone that looks like them being in a position of power, then they're not going to be able to imagine themselves potentially being there, right? When we close our eyes and think, what is I won't say public servant this time, but what does a politician look like? What does the president of the United States look like? What does a senator look like, right? Overwhelmingly, we're going to imagine a particular profile, most likely male, most likely Christian, most likely white, So that's a part of that is really just breaking through. But also I've increasingly realized on the issues themselves, if we talk about just yesterday, my school board was discussing the calendar. Do we include minority religions as holidays? Do we observe them? Even if thousands and thousands of students are missing school because of a holiday, it's not important enough for some people. Oh, what's the big deal? It's a holiday. But when you have someone who's experienced that personally, when you have someone, and maybe if they haven't experienced it personally, who can relate And this is where minority power becomes really impactful, right? Because we have parallel experiences. There's an understanding of what it means to be marginalized. The other side of the government, right? Where the government can do a lot of good, but also can really mess up. And having people who've experienced that side to be able to distrust and have the adequate amount of skepticism necessary to ensure that there are proper checks in place, that our laws are situated in a way that is not skewed against the people, right? All of that is perspective that people who are minorities and who've had these marginalized experiences bring to the table. And that impacts the decisions we have. I mean, even take something as big as so George Floyd, for example, this summer, right? That raised a lot of awareness about qualified immunity. Qualified immunity essentially defends the government, right, against anything that occurs within limits, but overwhelmingly gives them privilege and room to make mistakes without being accountable to the people. Something like that, if you have minorities at the table while that decision is being made, they'll have a different experience. They'll say, I've seen the other side of government, and I think we need more protections for the people, right? We should limit some of those, some of that room for abuse. That's one example that people might be able to relate to, but there are so many more that I can speak to, really, from curriculum, the way what we teach our kids about, the communities that we live in, our history, what narrative we tell, which shapes the way we view ourselves, our identities, and what direction we see this country headed in, right? It shapes our understanding of who belongs and who doesn't. The implications are far and wide, and that's the obligation on y'all. Everyone out there now advocating, you're bringing your perspective, which is not the majority perspective and is not even proportional, right, to how many of you are out there. So, and of course, all the many intersectional identities that you come with. So that those are all considerations to keep in mind. It's not just a nice thing to do. Politics is not just a hobby or a side thing or a good thing to do. It's an obligation. It's a necessity. It's something for survival, truly, for decisions to be made that have us in mind.
Absolutely. Well, I kind of want to segue to a really important topic, and you can be as detailed as you would like, or as general as you like. But I know that you yourself were recently a victim of discrimination and police brutality. Would you be willing to share your personal story of what happened with us?
Yeah. This actually goes to speak to why the minority thing is so important, right? I just talked about qualified immunity, and we have laws that don't even allow people to seek recourse for abuses that happen to them at the hands of law enforcement, for example. I mean, and we know this far further than my case, even. Sorry. That's the classic thing that happens to me even in meetings sometimes, that's the Muslim flavor you get to hear. But in any case, so speaking to the issue, I mean, what ended up happening to me, long story short, get stopped, for a minor traffic. I basically was told, didn't come to a full stop at a red before turning right. I didn't even really know what he was stopping me for. Cops abrasive on the get-go, which is usually the case. And within seconds, pulls a pepper spray bottle, drags me out of the car. I end up concussed. And then later they, takes me to the jail, and they forced me to remove my headscarf, despite the fact that I was very clear and explicit that this is constitutionally protected, etc. Night was horrendous. I mean, I won't go into the detail, but for the sake of time, really the piece here that's so important is these are the experiences of American people on the street, right? I mean, I happen to be someone who could elevate that story. I happen to be someone with means, resources, connections, whatever, to be able to turn this into a lawsuit. But there are thousands of families that experience this, that have police on their block, that it's a normal thing that they just get checked. I mean, even though, stop and frisk we think is no longer a thing, but in my own neighborhood, we have areas that are highly policed, right? And if you have more police presence in certain neighborhoods, the likelihood of those people ending up in the legal system is much higher, right? So the problems really, I mean, I can go on talking about the extent of it. But for me personally, the reputational piece was also important, that folks will use everything and anything against you, even when you're in the right. This was one of those issues where it's a question of public opinion. Pre-George Floyd, when this first happened, people were very comfortable vocally opposing me, right? And this came from a place where there's not an understanding of the possibility that our Fairfax County police could possibly do this. There's no way. She must have done something crazy, right? The government could not possibly go wrong. And why is that kind of the overwhelming voice? And why do people feel empowered to say that? Because public opinion hasn't shifted to a level of recognizing that absolutely the government has abuses and has made mistakes and continues to make mistakes and is ultimately human beings implementing decisions that were actually, and laws that were actually made by human beings. And those human beings had some racist objectives sometimes and wanted to keep certain people out and wanted the privileged only to be, who make decisions and on, right? So not being able to kind of see that until, I guess post George Floyd, there was a lot more consciousness around it. There was at least more shame to say something, right? And the reaction is entirely different. But we can't forget that these problems have always existed, that people are, of all kinds. I was thinking to myself, what if I was someone with autism and just didn't know how to engage with the officer? That could have escalated immensely. What if I didn't speak English, and I couldn't respond? What if I was undocumented? That would have been the end of that for me, right? Like bye-bye to my family, to everything I'd known. So that, I think it's really important for us to always think in ways that, yes, this was a personal incident, but how can I leverage this to bring about positive change? How can I utilize this now as a platform to speak to issues that we want to make sure we address and change on a more structural, systemic level? And how can we bring people together after something like that? We work towards building a coalition and really demanding policy changes and making something productive out of it, which is, easy to say, but truly to do that internal work to get there, people have very difficult. Yeah, people have a right to have that kind of anger fueling some of it. But I know I've gone on for a bit on this. The last thing I'll say is, for me as a Muslim, I try to remind myself, our prophetic example is that our advocacy, our passion for the issues that we want to go out and fight for, and hopefully you all will be soon, comes from a place of compassion, right? There's a difference. There's a righteous anger that we can have, but I remind myself that has to be processed, because at the end of the day, the objective is good. It doesn't do good for anyone to just kind of, burn it down and tear things apart and out of anger. Although it can be, understandable. I've felt that myself at some point, but that's something I try to always keep in mind, is the objective, eyes on the prize, is to bring positive change, to bring people together, to have some level of social cohesion and to rock the boat enough to get the change, but to not be destructive. So that's just something, to always keep in mind in our advocacy and to try to do the internal work to get on the same page for. So.
Yeah, well, and so speaking of criminal justice reform, that Oklahoma is a leader in incarceration per capita, like a world leader in this. And so criminal justice reform has become, thankfully, in my opinion, this year, it's become more and more bipartisan, which is great. However, the focus with criminal justice reform has been more on nonviolent offenders, which is a great place to start. However, like what we're talking about today is more of the systemic racism and the discrimination that happens when people of color, people of minority faiths are pulled over. And so maybe you don't know the answer to this. Maybe nobody knows the answer to this, but in your opinion, what do you think we can do to address those issues specifically?
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you brought that up. I think one of the really important pieces to keep in mind in change making is you don't want to just change it for you. You don't want to just change it for your family. You want to change it for good, right? You want to make it better for everyone and in the long term to have a permanent impact. So that's where you come, the piece you brought in with structural change, systemic change, thinking big picture comes in. It's actually on multiple levels. So first of all, there's the individual, the human experience, as I mentioned, which is public opinion, which is important. That sets the stage to make, to apply the pressure that the policymakers often need to get the stuff done. Okay. So just having conversations is the first step. Then you have layers where it's, okay, the laws that we have, what governs, what's acceptable, what's not, where do our taxpayer dollars go, what departments actually exist, right? So if you even look at your governor's office, for example, right? What are the different agencies, offices, departments that he has? That is decided based on laws because they have to comply with whatever the legislature decides, right? So if they have, for example, a massive budget for public safety that largely goes into policing, that's something to observe, because that means they have to spend that money on policing, which means they're going to find ways to increase that, right? So as opposed to, for example, putting it into the health, the agency, for health, right? Or maybe whether that's mental health support or drug helping with addiction, things like that might keep people out of that system. Or education, right? Raising our kids to believe in themselves and actualize their potential so that they don't end up in the criminal justice system. Those are ways to begin to see that structurally. So that's in terms of the laws that we have and how that actually manifests itself in agencies. I'll give you an example. Post 9/11. We saw an explosion of intelligence agencies in our federal government, all kinds of new, counterterrorism, this and that, the National Counterterrorism Center. You have all these things that popped up. The Department of Homeland Security's budget exploded, and that was all what? That's also a systemic issue, right? Because once you have all this money going into all these new departments, you're going to end up with more surveillance. You're going to end up, and those departments then have to justify their existence, right? So then they have to find crime, even if it's not there. And you end up with problems like entrapment, on and on. So that's one example of tracking kind of where the money goes and how it plays into structures and institutions that your government is comprised of. And then there's the judicial side. So let's say, somebody experiences a racist incident. The law right now is very poor at recognizing discrimination as a grievable remedy. So what I mean by that is as something you can actually bring to a court. Proving race is something, it's almost to a point where we try to be race blind, which obviously we all know is not a real thing, but prevents people from being able to say, hey, this person discriminated against me, or this cop, was racist, right? There's no, they're very limited means of coming to a court and saying that and having any chance of actually winning. That goes back to the legislature, who you guys are going to be advocating to, because they set up the laws. So when they decide that there is a law that says this is not okay, then you can actually go to a court and say, hey, this happened to me. This law protects me. That's not okay. So there are many, many different, there's the grassroots side. If that floats your boat, if you like engaging with people, there's the legislative side, which you guys will be working on and is extremely important because it then influences the judicial as well as the executive side, which is, the government and how it's made up. And then finally, all of this influences public opinion over time. It's almost there's a feedback loop there where the laws that we make are, set the priorities. That's where our taxpayer dollars go. And then that's kind of the society we're socialized into and grow up in and understand what's important, what's not, what's acceptable, what's not. Because we've come to understand, for example, now that it's totally normal for police to stop us on the side of the street. Can we imagine differently? Can we, expand our conceptualization of what a society could look like? I would say so. But anyway, so your task is to focus on those pieces that the legislature can amend, which, coming up with remedies, for example, that allow people to come to seek recourse in a judicial setting, or laws that minimize or establish, or we say, rather than saying just abolish the police or whatever, which has kind of been one of those things that's being said, is divest and reinvest, right? Invest in education, invest in mental health support, invest in addiction prevention, and social services and supports that families and communities need, that ultimately make us stronger and empower people to have agency over their lives. So I hope that gives people a sense, but change it's so complex, and I can go on, further in many other dimensions like NGOs and the media, and et cetera. But focusing on the legislature, y'all have a huge task at hand. So I'd encourage you to kind of pick your top 3 maybe passions and do your research and homework, not only on the issue, but also on whoever you're speaking to, because at the end of the day, it's human beings, and all of this is operated by people, and making that connection can be really powerful. And then, speaking your mind and heart on why it matters and what you want to see change.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Do you have any parting words for our viewers? Any words of encouragement you'd like to share before we sign off?
Yeah, I will say, my journey actually in all of this started something Girl Scouts had set up for us to advocate on the Hill. And, we spoke about the images, how women are portrayed in the media and how that's harmful to young girls and et cetera. But it was just walking into the Capitol and kind of having to find a voice for myself as a girl, and speaking to legislators that I was a little bit intimidated to speak to, and that I thought, why would they give me any time, or et cetera. But I want to remind you that these are people who represent you. They're only in office so long as they're representing the people well, right? So long as they're doing their job. And you are just as entitled, just as in the right to demand what you think should be, changed, and what should be passed as law, et cetera, given that you're their constituent. They represent you. And the last thing I'll say is, don't put it past yourself to be that person someday, right? Today, you're speaking to them, you're trying to ask them to do something, but one day you will be impatient and you'll say, I'm tired of trying to convince you, I'm going to be you. And
Yes.
Every one of you'd be amazed at how average and basic some people who are elected are. We tend to kind of put them on a pedestal, but they're your neighbor, they're your, friend, and they're just the next person. And every single one of you has something to contribute, something of value, because your life experience is unique. And that is the life experience that will shape policies and make it better for all of us. So don't underestimate your power. I'm really pleased to see you guys, putting this together. And inshallah, you guys have a blessed day of advocacy, and let it only be the first step. There's many, many more steps, and we need you. We need you to keep doing this work.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us, everybody. If you are interested in anything Abrar has said today, you can go to her website, abraromeish.com. It's been running along the bottom. We can also put it in the comments. Don't forget about the second segment of our Muslim Day at the Capitol tomorrow. It starts at 11 a.m. We're going to be talking about grassroots advocacy and how you can have more of a voice. Well, you can actually, it's a free event, but you do need to register. You can go to careoklahoma.com, and Adam's pulled up here the where the sign-up sheet is on our website. The advocacy training will be followed by a bipartisan panel discussion with Republican and Democratic legislators in the House and the Senate, and you will actually be able to ask them questions directly on Zoom. So please sign up and join us. We're really looking forward to it. And again, thank you, Abrar Omeish, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Go get them. It was good to join you.